July. Happy summer. We are here for Sexy First Friday. And it's actually our 43rd episode. And today we're going to be talking about alternative sexual expressions, preferences, and locations. Let me get Lyndsey. Hopefully it works. We started a little early in anticipation of having...
It worked.
I was getting nervous for a minute. Okay, well, happy July, Lyndsey. How's your summer going?
It's been good. Busy with kiddos, but it's good.
Yes. Keep trying to run our lives at the same speed without the kids in school. It's always a mistake. Well, we are here to talk about sex at the beach. We thought we'd do a beachy summer topic. So basically, we're just going to talk about alternative sexual expressions, preferences, locations, and general adventurousness, but sort of outside of the realm of specifically just kink, because we've done an episode on kink and BDSM. If you haven't seen that, you can find that on our YouTube, Sexy Fridays. That's our episode number 7. So this episode is going to be more geared towards a larger percentage of people. So there are quite a few people who are into kink, and it's usually more than people think. But in general, like the greater proportion of the population would be more describing themselves as like generally vanilla or more within kind of the normative sexuality, but sometimes want to try some adventurous things or go a little bit outside the norm. So this episode is for them. And before we get into it, I'm going to be asking Lyndsey a bunch of questions because this is definitely more her area of expertise, guiding people in this realm. But let's just introduce ourselves in case anyone new is here. So I'm Sam E Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher and an Enneagram coach specializing in Enneagram, sexuality, intimacy, and relationships. We always forget to say I am a type 5 and sexual subtype.
My name is Lyndsey Fraser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, also a certified sex therapist, and an IA accredited professional. And I have a practice in South Minneapolis where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram. And I am an Enneagram 9 who is social dominant.
So let's get into it. Lyndsey, why don't we start off? Would you be able to tell us about the 3 types of sexual experiences and which one we're honing in on today?
Yes. So a lot of times in my practice, I talk to couples about like, what are the 3 sexual experiences that we sort of want to have within our sexual lives, whether that is individually or whether that's with a partner. And what those are the quickie, which I think is really easy to define, right? This is, we've got 5 minutes, the kids are napping, we don't know when they're going to get up, or they may be watching a TV show and we got to get it in quick, or like we're tired and we've got a few minutes before we go to work, where we're just going to engage in the acts of sex. And there isn't much more to it than that. Sensual experiences, which are more of those kind of drawn out sexual experiences that we have. It might be a little bit more build up. It's a little bit more about the sensuality and the connection to the partner. Oftentimes I see these ones being like, it could be like a whole day thing. Like we're creating a romantic sensual day and we lay in bed together and we snuggle and cuddle and we're telling each other what we think of and all of these kinds of things. And then our third one is our adventurous. And one of the things I say with adventurous is a lot of people, and we're going to talk more about this, but like adventure itself can mean a lot of different things for different people. So like as Sam had mentioned, for some people, this might be engagement in a kink or fetish, but for some people, it's just going to be something a little bit different. And so why we wanted to focus on adventurous is because adventurous is more play. It's playfulness. It's bringing in play into the sexual realm. And as we know, play is just as important for adults as it is for children. And sex is one of those places that we get to go into more play with people and ourselves. And so let's focus on why we might be going there a little bit today. Anything you want to add to that, Sam?
I think yes, just trying to speak to more people that wouldn't define themselves as being like within a kink space or a kink community, but who also aren't like, I want to only have sex in the bedroom, on the bed, every single time. You know, like something that Lyndsey said, is that even just being in a different room of your house could be adventurous, and depending on who you're talking to. So we'll get into a little bit, this isn't an Enneagram focused topic, but we'll get into a little bit of the Enneagram differences we're going to see as regards what is conceived of as adventurous. But one of the things that could be adventurous, for example, would be different locations, you know, sex in public, which is how we got to the sex at the beach topic, also trying to do something summary. So let's dive into, Lyndsey, if you are working with a couple, they're new to trying adventurous things, or maybe one of them wants to push a little bit into more adventurous things, but they're new to it. What do you recommend as a first step for finding their way?
I think the big thing for couples in general is there's a couple of things I'm going to talk about here, but is like most of us don't have the tools or the capacity or even know how to talk about sex. So even before we're going to move into like how do we have adventurous sexual experiences, I think it's a good idea just to be talking about sex in general. So, you know, are we talking about sex with our partners? Are we just engaging in sex? One of the things I oftentimes will say in my practice, like if we're not talking about sex, we probably shouldn't be doing it. Because we need to be having those conversations around what works in our sexual life. For many of us, there's going to be tools that we need to do that. One of the things that I often recommend, I think I've recommended before, and I actually grabbed my books today so I can actually show them to people, is like this Hot and Unbothered one, for instance, is a really good starter place to go, because what I love about this particular book is it's written by a therapist. But like she actually has like nice little questions in the back that couples can start to have that conversation of sex. So if you've never actually even talked about sex with your partner, that's the place you can start. Barry McCarthy's got some great things too, like on the 5 dimensions of touch, which is also a place to start. But let's say you've done all of that and you've already had the conversation around sexuality and you're like, how do I bring in something a little bit adventurous? What I often see for people is people are a little bit afraid of like telling their partners what they want to try because they're afraid of judgment. So many of us live in judgment around sexuality. And so like my favorite little tool is a book again, which is actually called A Little Bit Kinky. I don't even know how I came across this one, but I came across like many years ago. I was looking for just something for couples to kind of talk about how do we bring in a little bit more playfulness or a little bit more adventure. And, you know, and a lot of my clients that come in or people in general, it's like, maybe I see myself as typically more vanilla, but I want to try something a little bit different or a little bit more adventurous or a little bit more fun. And what's great about this particular book is it'll just have like little like paragraphs, like 2-paragraph things that you can just like, hey, this one I think is, what was it? The scissor, for instance, is one of the examples they have on here, right? So they just have like different categories and different things. And it feels really safe for people because one, we can read the book together and I can say like, hey, what did you think about pleasuring your partner and pleasuring yourself, which is one of the chapters. That's chapter 4 in here. What did you think about some of those suggestions they made in there? And then like what you have the opportunity to do is sort of like, what are your body sensations, emotions, and thoughts? Like for me, for instance, I'm like, I don't ever want to use food. There is a food chapter. And like, you know, a lot of times so like for me, I'd be like, oh, like, you know, when I read the food chapter, for instance, I'm like, you know, I'm a little turned off. I'm like, ooh, that might be sticky. There might be, you know, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work. There's going to be a lot of cleanup involved. So like, you know, just when I read the food chapter, it's just not my thing. Well, if my partner was really into food, now it's something that they had to bring up like, hey, I'd love to try whipped cream. They can say, oh, well, when I read the food stuff, I actually think it might be kind of, you know, fun or enjoyable. And like, is there ways to do that? So it's sort of this platform of like, it gives you the ideas and then you can talk about sort of what works or doesn't work for you. And again, some people are going to love food, right, as an option to bring into their sexual life, and some people are not. I would say self-preservation dominance, which we'll talk more about, probably aren't going to like food as much as maybe some of your other types.
You recommend a lot, just in general, not as regards this topic only. You recommend this strategy of looking at the book, like the Hot and Unbothered book, read the book together, and that way it's not just about you putting yourself out there with no help, and risking rejection. It's more you can like use the book to support. So I just want to highlight that this strategy is something that you recommend for basically for everyone, for every type of conversation about sex. It can be helpful. And then we have the A Little Bit Kinky book specifically for these more adventurous conversations. Um, so you recommend a book like this to as a first step, maybe reading it, getting a partner to read it as a first step to starting to have some of the conversations about moving the sexual life into more adventure. So I was going to ask you what are some good resources to get the conversation started, but you already answered that. And there's also I don't have them off the top of my head, but there are the things you can find online where it's like a list of things to try, and you go through without looking at what your partner is circling. You can go through and circle the ones that feel good, or you can, rate the ones that feel really sexy to you versus not neutral versus hard nose, and then compare them. And some couples find that helpful too, as they start to go into this more adventurous territory. So, Lyndsey, do you have anything to add?
So I actually know what that website is. There's one called Mojo Upgrade. And so then you just take it, and then like what it will do when you take that one is like you both answer it, and it will only pull out the ones where you both were interested, or you're a maybe. So anything that was a no won't pop up there, and nobody will know kind of like how your partner responded. Though I suppose you could probably kind of figure it out if you really wanted to. But one of the other things too, before we move on, is like I want to talk just like a little bit about like the other piece that I think that's important to add is just like how do you define adventurous, right? Because I think so many of us get stuck in, and that means that like, oh, I probably should be into bondage, or oh, I should probably want to have sex in public. And I love what you mentioned is like adventurous is different, or playful is different for everybody. And so for some people that could just be even like engaging in a different sexual position. Let's say like you typically are a couple that typically wants to engage in maybe missionary position. That tends to be the position you typically use. And so then what you would be doing maybe is like, hey, maybe let's just try some different positions in the same place that we're already comfortable. Maybe it's sex in different parts of your house. One of my favorite, like most adventurous kind of playful examples that came in once was like a couple that was like up north at a cabin, and like just like running around naked and like giggling and like having fun. Like it doesn't have to be anything, because so many people get so stuck on like, there's like a definition, and they're kind of going more into kinks and fetishes or BDSM, and that's just eroping, and that's just like another avenue. But typically what I'll say is like when you're starting to discover adventurous, like it really means many different things to many different people, and there's not a right or wrong. And like I've had couples where it's like sex in public was titillating for one person and extremely anxiety provoking for another. And so like if we're not having those conversations, like that can be a really big deal too. But like I think just like even like what is your definition of adventurous, right? And like and being able to kind of figure out what that is for you. I mean individually doing your own work around that as well as a couple.
That is super important, really good advice to remember. And we'll talk more about the type and instinct specifics here in just a minute. But I'm wondering before we do that, Lyndsey, do you find that internalized judgment is a barrier for people to as they try to move into more adventurous sex?
Definitely. I think that there is so much judgment just around pleasure in general. I was talking to you earlier today that I had just participated in a sacred sensuality course. It was such a great course because they were just talking about sort of, and it's more meditation based, but like what was really interesting, like how much like we are given messages just even about pleasure, and like if you are, too indulgent in pleasure, and like what that says about you. And so what I do see is like we get that piece, but we also get that piece about like what does it mean if I like certain types of things, right? Like, am I a pervert? Am I slutty? Am I, all these kind of judgment words in language that we can put around ourselves. And so I see in particular in American culture, because we come from more puritanical base, is that people can have this internal struggle of like, I am actually really interested in, trying different types of adventurous sexual experiences, but internally I have this pushback of like, that's wrong, or that's not okay, or that says something about who I am as a person if I like these types of things. And I think that there's just so much internal judgment that we have. And that's also why I really like having like an external thing that we can talk about, because now it's like the book is suggesting it. I'm not suggesting it. So like, even if I have internal shame or stuff going, or judgment going on around it, it's like now this external book is like kind of bringing me the information, and then I can have more of a reaction to that book than it is a reaction to the partner. So many people are very fearful of bringing up something that they are interested in doing because their partner might judge them, or judging themselves even. Like, what does it say about me if I like, like this type of sexual activity or behavior, which unfortunately takes away from play and pleasure and fun and like sensation.
I'm so glad you're here sharing your wisdom with us. I feel like I always learn so much from you every time we talk. I'm starting to have a lot of thoughts about type and instinct, so I think we can maybe move into that a little bit. Something that popped up from just what you were saying is I see in research that threes and ones are often going to misrepresent the degree that they are into things that they think are judgeable, imperfect for ones, or inconsistent with the image of a good and successful person for threes. So in there, I don't want to pick on ones and threes, but in terms of this like internalized judgment, I see that a lot from those two types in research, even where, for example, threes were underreporting their pornography usage and ones were underreporting their kind of kink and BDSM and fetish participation, basically because of their internalized judgments. And of course, every type can have internalized judgments, but that just piqued for me to start talking a little bit about type. What comes to mind for you, Lyndsey, type differences and instinct differences as we move into more adventurous sex and having conversations about having adventurous sex?
I mean, I just think of like even like your sixes, for instance, right? Like people kind of have this assumption that, or partner with sixes, that they would not be interested in sort of more adventurous experiences because it needs to be more, you might get more reactions if you kind of spring or something on them spontaneous. But actually what we see and what we know and what you've seen in your research and what I've seen in my practice is that sixes are pretty open to a wide variety of things. They just need to be prepared. So we could be making an assumption or a judgment on sort of like what a six would be into or not into. It's like, I can be into a lot of things if I know where you want to go with me, and sort of having that kind of a mindset as well. So I think that that's pretty interesting as well as like nines will kind of like, they'll go anywhere with you if you want to take them for the most part. Instinct wise, it's really interesting because like I do see, when I have had clients, which is more of a kink, when I have had clients that, for instance, are like really into roping, social dominants tend to want to be more part of a roping community, right? And roping's complex because it's sexual, but it's not sexual depending on the group that you belong to. But like having the structure, having the rules, having the hierarchy, knowing what to expect, that there's something about that particular experience for social dominance that they really enjoy being part of sort of the group that is engaging in the fetish or the kink that they have. And you might see that, I see that, social dominance, like sex parties and things like that as well, might be a little bit more open to that. But then our self-preservation dominants might be more interested in anonymous sex. So like going into the woods and having a little bit more adventure with somebody that they don't know, and things like this as well.
Why do you think that is for them? What appeals to them about that?
I think for self-preservation dominance, it's because sex is more about sort of the like bodily sensations of sex and like having the opportunity to have a different experience with someone different. And so they have a little bit better ability to like sort of compartmentalize, I might say. Like sex can just be, actually depending on type, right? So like I think like in particular fives, and I've seen all variety of types that do this and enjoy this or have enjoyed that. Because there is sort of that, like I can engage in the body sensation with somebody and I don't necessarily have to have a lasting connection with them. And there's some like excitement sort of about having that encounter, not knowing who they are and never having to see them again.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised to learn that self-preservation dominants are arguably the best at one night stands, that they are not, generally tortured by them and they can kind of just like engage and then move on and that can work for them. Because we often think about sexual dominance as being like the most likely to do lots of the adventurous stuff, which I have to say is true in the research. Sexual dominants are going to be our biggest participants in kink and BDSM and like more outside the norm stuff. But that's a lot of people underestimate, I'll say, self-preservation dominance as well. Something I want to add about sixes, when we think about differences in terms of what someone might conceive of as adventurous, we want to look at like a seven versus a six. A seven is going to already be craving novelty, playfulness, adventurousness in general. And there's not much you can suggest to a seven that they would say no to, at least trying one time. There's probably a lot that they try and then they're like, oh, I've done that. I don't need to do it again. But sevens, they are very adventurous. But then sixes, like Lyndsey was saying, they can get kind of spooked if you just suddenly start doing something or suddenly spring something on them. But what I like to tell people, and people really underestimate sixes as well when it comes to sex, sixes are not only pretty open, like they are, I would argue, the most supportive and open type to partners with like unusual sexual interests. If you approach them in this respectful, like I'm gonna kind of lay it out and get your consent and make sure you're okay type of way, I see that people who have like unusual sexual interests partner with sixes. Quite often sixes are really happy to support it. And like you said, Lyndsey, it's just about the way you present the adventurousness to the six is what's really important. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit too about the research in terms of, so I didn't ask a broad question about adventurousness in my quantitative study. What I asked about is like the traditional kink and BDSM stuff, but we can use that as a little bit of a proxy in terms of how open certain types and subtypes are to trying things. So I'll just say that in general, it's going to be eights and fours that are going to kind of like charge headfirst into trying things. Eights because they're so assertive and unafraid and they don't internalize judgment very much. And fours because they are not only happy being against the grain, but they prefer to be against the grain. So anything that is going to come up for them in their sexual realm that's, different, they're going to really lean into it. We also do see twos pop up here a little bit, which a lot of people are surprised by. In terms of the subtypes, the kind of top five subtypes that are going to be interested in kink and BDSM and more outside of the norm sex is going to be sexual fours and sexual eights, which makes sense because it's our sexual dominance, and then combined with four and eight. And then followed by social eight, and then a lot of people are surprised to learn sexual fives and sexual twos show up there too, with being like really against the grain. And with sexual fives, we know that there's a little bit of an anti-authoritarian bent, so that kind of makes sense. And I don't know if you can speak to why sexual twos show up there, Lyndsey, because I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, I think it's the like wanting to feel alive energy, right? And that intensity. And so they already are about wanting to like please, twos are already about wanting to please the sexual partner. And so when they go into kink or BDSM or adventurous sex, it's that intensity of experience or feeling that they have. But like almost every sexual two that I have worked with, has really been here. And I think one of the things to put note on too is just because you are one of these types doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like or want these things as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Vanilla sex is good sex, kinky sex is good sex, adventurous sex is good sex. Really, what we're looking for is for you to have a holistic sexual experience, which is including all of these. But I think people do get surprised by twos. I actually don't, just because I've been doing this work for so long. But I think majority of people would not assume that the 2 or the 5 would be up there too. But I've worked with quite a few sexual 5s in my office too, and yeah, they are.
So the last thing maybe on this topic to cover is differences in how comfortable types are going to feel bringing this to a partner. So, for example, I find, at least in my work, that sixes are arguably the type that have the most trouble asserting an interest in something that's outside of like the couple's norm, because there's such a big fear of rejection and there's such a comfort with the status quo, even if the status quo isn't as good as what it could be. Sixes are like, well, I'd rather have kind of like the devil I know. So I find sixes have the most trouble leading into these conversations, and that nines would just be unlikely to, because of the way they're going to be led by what the partner is interested in. And also threes, because they have such an attunement to what's it going to look like on me if I bring this up. So what else would you say here in terms of who feels most comfortable, or at least comfortable, moving into these conversations?
I think the types that you mentioned, right? The 3, 6, and 9, I mean, for different reasons, right? The nines oftentimes don't even know what they like, but sometimes you can see it with ones too, and it really is whatever messaging the one got sort of around sexuality and what's the right way to be sexual. And so sometimes for them, it's like they were taught either, they're coming from a religious background or a family background that said, sex should happen in a certain way, and that, there was judgment around people that didn't follow the way that sex should be happening. And so like when they can have internal struggle around asking for what they need or want, but it's more of an internal struggle versus it being fear of what the partner might think, if that makes sense. Where you see with the 3, 6, and 9, it's more about the connection to the partner and worry about, well, I mean, honestly, most nines just have no clue what they like or want. I'll go where you want to go. And so, like, what I always say for my nines, like, this is your growth point, like sitting in, knowing what you like or want. But they still can be hesitant to bring up once they do discover that, because they're afraid of like having conflict or disconnection from the partner as well. But it is interesting. The image for the 3, like you said, and then the 6, sort of that reassurance, or like, are we going to be okay in relationship too?
Kind
The
of really,
rest, the rest kind of just bring it up. I don't know. Besides
so
twos.
there's some that would fall a little bit in the middle. I would say twos and fives. Our absolute easiest people are going to be our eights and sevens, and then fours. And of course, if there's like enculturated judgments, and like, I'm not saying it's easy for every one of those types, but in terms of the people who have an easier time and are going to be more likely to bring up conversations about wanting to move outside of what the couple has been doing, eights are just going to say it in most cases, like, hey, why don't we try having sex at the beach? Sevens too, and fours often as well. They, depending, but usually them as well. And then I'd say everyone else kind of falls in the middle. Anything to add, Lyndsey?
Nope, I agree.
Okay, we're already getting towards the end, because it always goes fast. So before we end, we could talk about a little bit of things that we have going on. Um, so I'll say a couple of them, and Lyndsey, you can say a couple of them. So we have our new streamlined Enneagram and Sexuality for Transformed Relationships self-paced course. So that's about a 4.5 hour material course that has CEUs with it for therapists, which you don't have to be a therapist. I don't want to confuse people, and like people who aren't therapists think they they can't take it. It's for personal growth as well as there's a little bit of a separate track for therapists and for personal growth. So that is always available at the link in our bios. And then, Lyndsey, do you want to talk about our pre-sale?
Yeah, in the fall, we are having the Enneagram and Sexuality, the Repressed Instinct. And right now we have our pre-sale for that. That one's going to be over Zoom. And that will be recorded if you're not able to attend live. Though I always say you can get a lot more out of the live experience if you can do that. And right now we have like the lowest price that it'll be at. And so that will also is in both of our bios. And we're super excited. It basically is the add-on to the Streamline course because we didn't have an opportunity to talk about this piece. And I think like what you said like about the Streamline course too, just like basically how it works. Like I think you make a good point, right? Like, do I have to be a therapist to take this? The beginning portion of it is for everyone, whether you're a therapist or you're doing it for personal growth, and it's more information based. And then the second part of it, we have a track for each group to go. So if you're there for more personal growth, there's a particular track just for you. And then if you are a therapist, there's a particular track for you. So we made it very versatile so that both people, and honestly, if you're a therapist, you got to learn about your own sexuality too as well. So it's a great way to learn about yourself. And then I guess our last thing, right? Do you want to add that in, or should I add that?
I can add it. So we also have a freebie that is a free guide on type and sexual desire. And we made that at an easy link so people can remember that's at tinyurl.com/enneagramsex. And that one's completely free. It's kind of like a miniature version of our ebook. I didn't write a note to talk about our ebook, but we do also have a full length ebook as well, which you can find at our links in both of our bios. We've created a lot of things at this point, and we probably just tell the world about them instead of just creating more and more, and no one knows about it. So that's it. We're going to be focusing on repressed instincts for a lot of the next episodes. We're going to go back to doing concrete kind of deep dive Enneagram stuff as relates to sexuality in advance of our Enneagram and Sexuality, the Repressed Instinct workshop in the fall. We're already at the end, so it's been a great July episode. Lyndsey, thanks for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, you as well, Sam. It's great to see you again.
See you in August.
Yep, see you in August.
Bye.